everyone. Welcome to your newest episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host, myself, Laura Matsu, and my husband, Bernhard Gunther. And on this episode, we are going to talk about dark triad personality types and occult forces. For those who have never heard this term before, it's a good term to know. And the dark triad is basically a specific personality type that's made up of negative personality traits, namely narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. And we're going to especially link this into how it relates to the topic of occult forces. So first, we're going to define what is a dark triad personality type, what are the three main traits, and how do these personality traits become more emboldened with social media, which is something that has been discussed a lot recently. So we're going to also discuss how dark triad personality types can be used as quote unquote agent Smiths of the Matrix. And we're going to define what that is. And then we're going to lastly in the first hour share, like, how can we share our gifts and talents and thoughts with the world without being dragged down or affected by the extreme amounts of these types, especially online. And in part two, we're going to really link this with the psycho-spiritual work. So we're going to talk about how these dark triad personality types can be used as a perfect vector for occult forces, how that operates, how our own thought projections can also relate to the psychic attacks that we received. And we're going to also talk about different types of evil that operate in the world via Steiner's model and how this relates to also elemental forces. And again, how can you protect yourself spiritually from these types of people and these types of energies? So before we get into that, I just want to share, for those who are new to our podcast, we always do the first hour-ish for free. And then the second hour we have only for members on our website. So if you want to join, I think it's like $11, $12 a month or something. $11 a month. You can become a member and you can have access to literally now 100 hours of over 100 podcasts we recorded where we go much deeper into the topics that we discuss on the first hour. So if you'd like to join us, you can join at veilofreality.com/membership, and you can immediately get access to over 100 hours, bonus hours of over the 100 podcasts we recorded so far. So yeah, let's just go right into it. So, this podcast is really for anyone who's noticed that as the darkness, as the trauma has increased in the world, people, especially online, have gotten very hostile, cruel, sadistic. It's like, it was really bad before. It's even worse now. Or anyone who's maybe been attacked or threatened or shamed online by a random stranger, or maybe even someone you know is the type of person who would do this. And this happens especially online, and we'll describe why that is. Or maybe you're someone who's really tried earnestly to put yourself out there, to share your work with the world, but you've noticed that there's people who literally just get off on hurting other people and trying to drag you down. So if you're curious, what is that? We have a lot of great info on this podcast for you. And then the last people who I really want to say that this podcast is very much for is the people who are scared to share their thoughts online because they're worried about the backlash, because that's one of the main ways that I think occult forces and kind of the agent Smiths of the Matrix try and shut us up through our own minds and our own self-censorship. So if that's you, if you've been thinking about any of these issues, this episode will have a lot of good points for you. Yeah. So why are we talking about this?
Well, as you just hinted at it, I mean, we have seen this increasingly pathology being normalized more and more in the way we communicate, especially online, And in my line of work, have been talking about, very controversial topics for over 20 years, even before social media started. I started off on MySpace and Facebook and then expanded on Twitter, YouTube, all of that. I'm not even on Instagram. You're on Instagram as well, which seems to be quite a interesting place as well. But I've noticed over time, I've been used to being attacked for certain views I have. And usually, most often, these move into personal attacks. But I've definitely seen an increase of very vile, vicious personal attacks, of really people wanting to hurt others. They have become very nasty, especially over the past 3 years. There's an increase of polarization. We see it on a political level we have talked about this, of the left versus right and right versus left. Both are kind of can easily fall into these dark triad types, which we're going to define more shortly. But the reason we want to talk about, because I think you really hit the nail on the head, what you said at the end. A lot of people are actually now afraid or scared to engage or speak out or speak just even their mind or their opinions and views, because they don't want to get shamed. They don't want to get attacked or threatened,
Yeah.
you know. And I understand that. You know, I've been in the trenches basically for over 20 years on the front line, so to speak, speaking out, putting myself online with my views, my own personal experiences, and definitely controversial views, and been attacked left and right, accused, very nasty, even death threats and all of that. It doesn't feel good, you know, as much as I like to admit or like to say, I don't care what other people think. On some level, and that's what we want to talk about, it affects you energetically. It's like a psychic weapon that hits you and can drag you down. And in the past, I used to engage or, you know, kind of almost out of my well-meaning intention, trying to make people understand, not really understanding what I was dealing with, right? And now, really with the emergence of this idea of this concept of the dark triad, it makes a lot of sense of what is really going on and how people engage, especially online, because a lot of people in the way they communicate online is nothing they would ever do in person, in face with the other person.
Yeah, because so people basically come to me a lot and they tell me I'm scared of sharing whatever. It can be any gift, whatever they're doing, their work with the world. They can be anything from a naturopath to like a yoga teacher to like even like just some sort of business coach or something. And they're scared of sharing themselves, especially online, because they're scared of what people might say. And I also think in large part, you know, it's not really necessarily constructive feedback that I think they're scared of, which is rarely happens with these personality types, which basically never happens by definition with these personality types. They're scared of dealing with trolls who tend to be dark triad types like this, because it is really draining. It can really get you down. It can make you think, oh, it's better just to not speak out, not say anything, because I'm just going to have to deal with this nonsense. I've definitely been there many times. But I really think in order for us to become spiritual warriors, we need to be able to handle these battles, because the occult forces loves to use these kinds of people to shut you up, to make you be quiet. Yeah. And so, you know, I've talked about the spiritual war on other previous recent podcasts, but I see this spiritual war being fought psychologically, especially through pathological personality types like the ones we're about to describe. So understanding the dark triad personality type can really help you navigate these kind of troubled relationships that we're dealing with in all spheres of life, because we do live in an age of where there's an increasingly amount of what the mainstream would call mental illness. And we're going to talk about the main factors that we see. And the issue with what's going on is that these traits are often rewarded in the era we live in. So it's like they're getting rewarded for what is meant to be a life-stealing person, which is a form of evil, essentially.
Yeah.
So let's just define dark triad before we even go deeper.
Exactly. So let's dive into it. So as you mentioned in the beginning, basically the dark triad is a combination of 3 malevolent personality traits, and that is narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. So in a sense, you have to understand that the combination of these 3 personality traits is not as severe as the personality disorder of each isolated, of the full-blown narcissist, the full-blown psychopath, the full-blown Machiavellian
That's not.
type.
I don't think that's a personality disorder. But if you were a full-blown narcissist psychopath, that's a malignant narcissist.
Exactly.
Actually,
I mean that's how it. But still, so we want to define it. So, first of all, narcissism, and we want to talk about this later as well, because narcissism is definitely an epidemic nowadays. At the same time, it has also become a more popular topic that is also often misused. So basically, everyone I don't like or responds to what I want is a narcissist fallacy, as I call it. But still, narcissism is definitely an epidemic, especially on social media, where it's being normalized, even cherished, even promoted. Rewarded, exactly. So narcissism, in a nutshell, is a soul sickness with individuals exhibiting entitlement, devaluation of others, and lack of empathy. Ultimately, narcissists suffer deep self-esteem wounds. They're highly insecure, actually, and alienation from their true selves, and have basically an inability to truly connect with others.
Yeah. It's like a gaping hole where their true self would be that they cover up with a false persona that can be extremely convincing.
And that needs to be fed with attention, admiration,
Yes,
and all
you need
of
to
that.
feed the false persona, but the true self cannot be touched.
Exactly. Now, Machiavellianism is inspired by the strategies in Niccolo Machiavelli's famous book, The Prince. It's all about manipulation. That novel, basically. It promotes the idea that the ends justify the means, an approach that may be increasingly appealing in today's virtualized world, where others may seem less human, more like avatars, right? We're talking to a profile, and most often fake profile pic, the fake names and all of that. It is also a normalized strategy towards success nowadays, right? We've seen this a lot as well. Fame and fortune at all costs in a world where, as I mentioned, pathologies have become normalized and are even promoted, ultimately lacking conscience and integrity. So it's highly manipulative. And the last of the triad, psychopathy, is based on a complete lack of conscience. Most often expresses itself violently, manipulative, and sensation-seeking. They're ruthless. They can be, as we all know from Hollywood movies, maybe serial killers, but even more so, even high-ranking members in society as well, especially people in power, CEOs, celebrities, influencers, politicians, Wall Street traders, even the quote-unquote normal guy next door, because they have a very convincing mask of sanity that can cover up their internalized evil. And they're also driven, similar to the narcissist, but even more so intolerable emptiness inside, and have a desire for omnipotent control. And psychopaths are often recast as heroes, actually, in our pathological society as well. Again, we have to understand the reason why these personality type, pathological personalities thrive nowadays, and the dark triad is because these behaviors have more or less become normalized and are even promoted and cherished in our pathological society.
Yeah, so we have to understand that these are more subtle than the full-blown personality disorder, but they're still identified by disagreeableness, dishonesty, lack of empathy, and social exploitation. So they see others as a way to get their own needs fulfilled, and just they're all transactional, basically. And also, we have to understand with the psychopathic aspect of it, there's a aspect of sadism. So they get off on making others feel the pain that they really do feel deep inside, but they don't want to feel. So they're just the pain when they lash out at you, when they just want to, they say something awful to you that you've never heard anyone in real life say to anyone before. Like they'll say really awful things to complete strangers. And why is that? It took me so long to get this because, we all tend to project our personality traits onto other people. We think that other people hold the same qualities as we do. And so I just confused me. Why would someone get off on making random strangers feel terrible online? Because that's how they feel power. That's how they feel glee. They've made you suffer in the same way that they're suffering inside, and that makes them feel good. It literally gives them a dopamine hit. I hate to say it. So some people basically get off on getting dopamine hits and by attacking others. And this is especially prevalent online. We need to understand that, especially because there's an anonymous factor to social media. This allows dark triad types to basically attack, threaten, shame others with little to virtually no consequences. So the people who have this sadistic personality trait, you can't just go off into the regular world and do this to people without eventually probably getting the cops called on you if it escalates, right? You can in little passive aggressive ways, but I mean really going out and personally attacking people the way they do online. So it's not socially acceptable in society, and they have to suppress that desire, but that desire has to go somewhere. And then online becomes the perfect playground for them to act out these sadistic desires without any consequence. It's literally like amazing for them.
Yeah.
So there's been, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I just want to just say, because it's very important to understand these dark triad types, as you mentioned, are a bit more subtle than the full-blown counterparts. That's why it's sometimes hard to detect because they're highly manipulative, very skilled in that sense, or skilled in manipulation.
Yeah.
And they may even appear to champion a cause, the virtue signal, but only to exploit it to their own needs.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
why you see dark triads even in the truther movement. People speaking out against the matrix and all of that. You see it on the left.
On all sides of the spectrum.
Everywhere, on the leftist political spectrum, on the conservative right political spectrum, in religious groups, Christians, all of that.
Anywhere where there's power.
Anywhere there's power. But they infiltrate almost, also from an occult perspective, we're going to go into this deeper. But it's very important to understand. That's why it's so hard sometimes to identify or notice at first, because they may appear on the same side like you are, so to speak, but they're driven by a whole complete different motivation.
Okay, so let's go into the study that has been quoted a lot, which basically studied the traits of a troll. And the title of this article is Research Reveals Motives of Internet Trolling. So this was done by Brigham Young University. I'm reading an article about it, summarizing it on Neuroscience News. And basically they outline as social media and other online networking sites have grown in usage, so too has trolling, an internet practice in which users intentionally seek to draw others into pointless and at times uncivil conversations. That's the main point is, you've been dragged into a pointless conversation when it's just going in circles. Like you address what someone says, they move the goalposts because they're not really interested in having a conversation with you. They just want to drain your energy, basically. So they talk about this research from Brigham Young University, which was recently published in the Journal of Social Media and Society, which basically spoke about the motives and personality characteristics of internet trolls. And then it says, through an online survey completed by over 400 Reddit users, the study found that individuals with dark triad personality traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy combined with Schadenfreude, a German word meaning that one derives pleasure from another's misfortune, were more likely to demonstrate trolling behaviors. And they said people who exhibit these traits, known as a dark triad, are more likely to demonstrate trolling behaviors if they derive enjoyment from passively observing others suffer. So they get enjoyment from observing others suffer, basically. Said Pamela Brubacher, co-author of the study. They engaged in trolling at the expense of others. The research found that individuals who experience pleasure from the failures or shortcomings of others consider trolling to be an acceptable online behavior. So they think it's acceptable. That's the main thing to understand. And they think it's totally okay. And it said women who participate in the study viewed trolling as dysfunctional, while men were more likely to view trolling as functional. So they're doing it because they think, oh, this is just what we do online. It's a healthy behavior in this pathological environment. And it says this behavior may happen because it feels appropriate to the medium, said Church. So heavy users of the platform, of social media platforms, may feel like any and all trolling is quote unquote functional simply because it's just what people do when they go on social media. The researchers say it's important to note that those who possess Schadenfreude, am I saying that right?
Schadenfreude.
Yeah, you're saying, so Schadenfreude often consider trolling to be a form of communication that enriches rather than impedes online deliberation. So they literally think that this enriches the online discourse. Because of this view, they're not concerned with how their words or actions affect those on the other side of the screen. To them, trolling isn't perceived as destructive, but merely as a means for dialogue to take place. The study found here's another interesting note in the article, and it says, the study found no correlation with being outspoken online and trolling behavior. So this is not just being outspoken and sharing unpopular opinions. This is specifically targeting other people and they think that this is a means of dialogue. The findings noted that people who actively speak out and voice their opinions didn't necessarily engage in trolling behaviors. And then they just give some advice, which I think is very useful. Remember who you are when you go online, said Church. It helps when we think of others online as humans, people with families and friends like you and me, people who feel deeply and sometimes suffer. We forget their identities as actual people, seeing them instead as merely usernames or avatars. It becomes easier to engage in trolling. Brubaker suggests approaching online discourses with an open mind in order to understand various perspectives. Digital media gives us the power to connect with people who have similar and different ideas, interests, and experiences from our own. As we connect with people online, we should strive to be more respectful of others and others' point of view, even when the other's perspective may not align with ours. Each of us has the power of influence for good online. We can do this by exercising mutual respect. So that's the main thing. Is I also have to applaud people who I see people doing an effort to have online communications respectfully and in a way that's respectful of other people's opinions. So I see people seeing this happening and making an effort to do differently, which I think is what we each need to do in our own lives.
Yeah, that's all fine and good. Idealistically, I can see that as well. But it's also, I think you have to understand, to appeal to people's conscience in this case is with the dark triad types is not going to happen because they lack conscience, they lack compassion, like the research showed, or the review, that they justify it. They think that's acceptable behavior. This is what you do. And the reason they justify it also because they literally, again, the key points, they get off on it. There's something they feed off of it, and that goes deep on the occult perspective, on a maybe just biochemical perspective. They get dopamine hits. Via attacking others, and then especially when they engage and create more, drama and all of that, they feed off of lower frequencies of fight, of provocation and projection and all of that. So it's very important to keep that in mind.
Yeah,
it's also important.
Yep,
I want to also address that because I've been exposed, dealing with that for many, many years, and now I've gotten my boundaries clear as well. We're going to talk about shortly about what to do with these types, because sometimes it's hard to detect as well. But also, they tend to then also try to get others engaged as well. So people who are then actually connect to the dark triad types, who kind of match that darkness or that frequency, and it comes as a group entity, like a group shadow projection luge fest. So they get off of then getting others into this whole mess as well, and kind of attack one person. And you see this, on various social media platforms. I think it's most relevant on Twitter, from what I've seen, on Facebook as well, but there you have more control over who comments and whatnot. Instagram as well, you've experienced it. This is all on social media in varying degrees. And it's very important to understand also what you just mentioned in the research as well, that it's mostly, not always, but mostly anonymous people who hide behind a fake profile pic and the fake name, the nameless people. And that's kind of an issue. I remember Jordan Peterson said, even on Twitter, because he's dealing with all these pathological individuals getting at him, mostly anonymous cowards, as I call them, and he even appealed to Elon Musk. There should be no anonymity, people need to register with the real name, and obviously people get upset. Some level I can understand with people should be able to be anonymous, and then people pull these excuses. Well, I don't want to have my public opinion be seen by my family or by my boss, my work, and all of that. Fine and good, but a lot of people use that anonymity.
Sorry, you're making me mess it up too.
Anonymity. As an excuse to engage in the dark triad, to engage in the projections and attacks. Right?
Yes, exactly. Because the main thing is they want to be able to exercise sadism against others with no consequence. They don't want to have to deal with any repercussions. There are consequences karmically, energetically, that they have to deal with at some point, but they don't want to deal with any immediate consequence. I have to say, though, speaking of the point that how these types of personalities are rewarded in society, is we really live in this era that rewards the more clickbaity, the more offensive, the more views it gets. I know some people listen to the podcast. I was told us they're big fans of it, but Andrew Tate is a good example. A lot of these kind of popular right-wing conservative influencers. I mean, I've seen it on the left too. Obviously, people listen to this podcast. But the thing is these types of personality traits get engagement, actually. They just rip off other people's work. They just say things to upset people, to offend people, to hurt people. Yeah. And this is what gets clicks. This is what gets views. This is what gets energy. So as I see a large majority of them, definitely just faceless, nameless profile. I've dealt with literally thousands of those. I've also seen that if people use their real name and use their real picture, and they can easily also rise to the top as influencers demonstrating these traits, because this kind of clickbaity, it just made me so angry, this kind of offensive tweeting culture that we live in is also encouraging these types to gain success.
Yeah.
Because as long as we respond to it, as long as we act out and get infuriated with these people and, oh my God, I can't believe this person said this, they're doing that to offend you because it gets them views, it gets them readership, it gets them attention.
My best example is Andrew Tate.
Then we hook into the same virus that they're taking over. So, what do you, and I also want to touch as well that the reason why, because I did an interesting experiment recently. I did this astrology post about Sinead O'Connor. I was very moved by her death. You can just go to my Instagram and look it up and read it. And it got so, it became a very polarizing topic, meaning most people appreciated it. I want to note that. And thank you for the people who did. But then people were really lashing out. Oh, Sinead O'Connor is a celebrity. I can't believe that she was awful. And how dare you post a picture of a celebrity who took the vax, and attacking me for writing about her, and all of this nonsense, right? And just Wetiko just flooded onto that post, and people started arguing with each other. But the one thing I noticed is when I turned off comments on that post, people wouldn't message me privately with those same thoughts, that they would feel very comfortable expressing the same nasty thoughts in a comment. So there's something about the lack of relational information that people pick up online. And when they just do it on a comment thread, they just think they're just putting it on a wall. They don't think that there's any impact on anyone involved. They just project their nastiness into the comment section, and they just feel good about it. They walk away and it's all good, but these people won't even actually have the bravery to message me privately and to have a conversation. So that's one step. But then I also notice this relational experience. So when we're speaking to someone, we're picking up their mood by their subtle facial movements. We're picking up the state of their nervous system. We're picking up how interested or disinterested. We're getting feedback from their face and from their nervous system all the time based on what we said. But when you're online, you're literally removed from all of that information. So you don't get that feedback. So for example, if I went up to someone in person and was like, "You're an idiot. How could you think that?" I would see their face screw up into an angry expression. And if I'm relatively connected and empathic, I would feel that anger towards me. And that would be my feedback to be like, "Oh, don't be an asshole to people." But they don't get any of this relational feedback. And that's why they freely do it more online, because that's how they can do it without realizing, oh, I just hurt that person. Oh, that person might punch me in the face. Like, this relational feedback is actually essential to our social intelligence.
Yeah, and even not only, I would say, with dark triad types, the more extreme cases, but even putting the mirror on myself or on the listener, so to speak. Where do you tend to comment on other people's posts and say things you would never dare to say them in person, face to face? And maybe you claim you do, but it's a whole different energetic setup if you're sitting face to face with somebody and really tell them what you want to tell them.
Yeah.
And what you shared reminded me, as you were sharing, how people are more courageous, anonymously putting their comment on a public thread. It's like an anonymous crowd screaming from the crowd, towards the stage.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they would never say to the person on stage in person, right? It's always safer from the masses of the crowd, similar on a thread where other thousands of other people can comment as well.
Yeah.
So they feel just way more courageous that way.
Yeah.
And that's how they hide themselves. But I think the relational aspect is a very key point, especially nowadays, where we have a lot of antisocial behavior that has become normalized with the advent of the internet, people losing more and more relationship skills. And hence, don't think about consequences anymore. I think it was Mike Tyson who gave the quote or something like that, how people just get away with saying things on the internet, or trolling that would never get away in person and without consequences. But there are always consequences, even on a karmic level, energetic level. We want to also talk about these thought projections and how they turn into forces, elementals, and all of that, and usually come back around as well.
So, I want to also share about how these types can be taken over by Wetiko And then what they do is they'll infect you with Wetiko and how that can kind of operate. So I'm just going to use a personal example that I just touched on. After I made that post, I shared about Sinead O'Connor's astrology, what I saw from evolutionary astrology perspective. There's a part of me that's like, I don't want to even post anymore. Why bother? Why share what I think? There's just I hate dealing with these kind of just pathological people. It's so draining. I get into poor me. I get into my own victimhood. And then that's exactly what Wetiko operating through these pathological people wants you to do. It just wants you to shut up. Shut up. Don't say anything. Shut your mouth. Never share anything that's important to you. It doesn't want you to share your light. It doesn't want you to share your talents. So we need to see that this is also an aspect of Wetiko, where these types are infected by Wetiko and trying to get you to not share your gifts or to speak out against anything. And then they infect you by Wetiko through making you self-censor yourself, because it can become such an unpleasant experience to deal with these pathological people. We can feel drained. We can feel disheartened. We can feel like, why bother? Why should I do this? And self-censor ourselves. So we need to see that these forces are actually, if we're getting kind of attacked by these people, especially if we're just expressing a perspective that goes against the status quo, it's usually a sign we're on the right track. And we need to use these people as a test of our own initiation, of our own strength, rather than just collapse from them.
Exactly. Excellent. So let's talk about, because one of the big aspects of the dark triad, but hold on, let me back up first, because as you were sharing that, actually, I remembered even in my own work over the years, even before I met you, when I was under vicious personal attack online, was really intense. Also occult attacks through people, psychic attacks, very vicious death threats and all of that. I literally had that injection in my thought. I'm like, I'm not going to do anything anymore. I'm going to, even to the point, delete my website, my work. I'm done with this. I can't take that anymore. It really put me down.
Yeah.
So I can see that Wetiko infection, how that keeps people silent, because they don't want to deal with the madness. They are afraid to speak out. And that's how the matrix works, by intimidating you through other people in order to keep you quiet.
Yes. So let's talk about these, let's spend a little bit on the different types of narcissism and how that relates to it. So yeah. I know that narcissism gets really thrown around a lot. I just see it as a specific predominant personality type that we have on the planet right now. Astrologically, interestingly, the Pluto and Leo generation, which are the boomers, have the main shadow of narcissism. And then interestingly, a lot of them have passed that on to their children. So this is laid out astrologically. There's a reason why it's happening. So, there's an epidemic of narcissism, but there's also an epidemic of people using the term narcissism and just walking around and calling everyone a narcissist. So we want to just define what we mean by that and just different aspects of it to just add some clarity to that topic.
Yeah, I think it's important, because one of the aspects of the dark triads is narcissism. Like you said, for various reasons, narcissism has become more normalized, but it also has been abused. And I'm going to reference, what I'm going to share is loosely also based on an article by Dr. Jonathan Shettle and some of his Twitter posts as well, because he made some really good points about narcissism, especially on social media and pop culture. Really, narcissism has, everybody's blaming all manner of bad contact on the quote-unquote narcissist, abusive parent, narcissist, overbearing boss, narcissist, cheating boyfriend, narcissist. We see this a lot. Especially in our field as well, people who haven't really worked through a relationship stuff still have grudges against their ex. They always call their ex a narcissist, But if you look deeper into it, you can see that the so-called narcissistic personality disorder has, is very complex, has very many different expressions. And in the end of the day, even Dr. Shettle says that there's such a thing as, quote, the narcissist, because narcissism is not one thing but many things. In fact, most description of the narcissist on social media mistakenly conflate them with all kinds of other things. So from the psychodynamic tradition perspective,
I want to be clear that you're reading Jonathan Shettler's article.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I said. Exactly. Yeah. In the psychodynamic tradition from which the term narcissism arose, narcissistic personality styles exist at different levels on the continuum of health pathology. So that's very important. We mentioned these in previous episodes before. There's narcissism at a healthier level. There is healthy narcissism, actually, right? There's healthy self-confidence, healthy sense of self. Not all narcissism is pathology. And then at a more neurotic level of personality organization, and then at a more disturbed borderline level of personality organization, and then at a still more disturbed psychotic level as well. So these distinctions are obviously lost in pop culture that portray all narcissists, people as arrogant, self-inflated, and exploitive, when it's not at all the case.
I can read the quote that he says next.
Yeah. So like that's here, I quoted, this is a great description, basically definition of the narcissistic personality.
So he says, narcissistic, Jonathan Shedler again, he says, narcissistic personality is characterized by the coexistence of contradictory feelings of superiority and grandiosity and feelings of vulnerability, emptiness, and inadequacy. In overt narcissism, we tend to see only one side of this inner conflict, the self-importance, the grandiosity, and entitlement. But internally, the person is torn between feelings of superiority and painful feelings of emptiness and unworthiness. The overt grandiosity defends against and masks the underlying feeling of emptiness, inadequacy, and inferiority. The person works continually to shore up their fragile sense of self and make use of others to support this effort. They need others as an audience to witness and affirm their importance. And this need can override the awareness that those recruited as their audience are also human beings with their own emotions, needs, vulnerabilities, and experiences. This interferes with developing the kind of mutual, genuine relationships that give life a sense of meaning and purpose that could counteract the inner sense of emptiness and deficiency. The result is that a person with a narcissistic personality dynamics can be surrounded by admirers, but starved emotionally in a sea of plenty. So like they're kind of like this like endless black hole where like no matter what you give them, no matter, even I see this online when you get roped into these conversations, no matter how kind and patient and you answer their questions, it's never good enough. It's just constant. They're just like this black hole, just sucking all the energy in the room out of it.
Yeah. Exactly. So most people are familiar with the overt narcissism, self-importance, entitlement, feeling superior and all of that and needing a lot of attention, showing off. Obviously, that's very normalized on social media. We see that everywhere. People feed off of attention. Even these trolls feed off of that attention, right?
Yes.
Obviously, they want to be seen as that. But, it's very important. And that's why I really brought up Jonathan Shedler's work here, and he describes very well the other side of the narcissism, which is more covert or what he calls vulnerable narcissism. Very interesting. And that's a lot of people fall into that as well, which may not seem narcissism, but it ties into what I've written about before. There's self-importance, one aspect, overinflation, but also self-pity is an aspect of narcissism. Overly indulged, feeling sorry for oneself and wallowing in misery and all of that. So he writes, in vulnerable or covert narcissism, in contrast, the narcissistic defense go against inadequacy fail. Rather than experiencing themselves as superior, people with covert narcissism experience themselves and come across to others as deflated, self-critical, and beaten down by life. Although they often represent symptoms of depression in clinical practice, they generally derive little benefit from treatment that specifically target these depressive symptoms. Beneath their suffering and self-criticism, clinicians often find that their inner life is dominated by fantasies of importance, success, and glory.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot of trolls at that as well. I think a lot of overt narcissism also deal with like unconscious or conscious jealousy and envy they project on others.
Yes.
They are the main characters in their internal narratives, unappreciated, unrecognized, and denied their rightful place in the world. At different times, the same individual may present as either a grandiose or vulnerable narcissist, depending on how well their defenses are functioning at that point in time and how well the external world is cooperating with those defenses. So basically saying you can fall, these narcissists can become either like an overt or covert narcissist, depending on, maybe the situation and context,
life.
right?
Yeah, their life, yeah.
Both manifestations of narcissism lead to difficulties in developing and maintaining, obviously, meaningful and lasting interpersonal connections. ultimately the person life feels painfully empty. So the
yeah.
chronic victim here that complains of what is against me, I suffer, I don't have my share in the world, and then project on other successful maybe people or, who are based on envy and jealous, are actually suffering from covert narcissism.
Well, when they see anyone who has something that they think that they deserve, whether it's a good job or a wife or a happy marriage or a husband or, family or riches or whatever, there's a part of them that deeply believes that they're entitled to what they have, but without having to do the hard work for it, without having to develop the relational skills. And that's where it comes into this covert narcissism, is like they live in this state where like they believe that they're entitled to the things that they envy in other people, but they don't do anything to actually move the needle into those areas of their lives. And I see this a lot, in people. And I can even see when I went through extreme depression in 2010, 2011, it got really bad, there was also something within me that was operating like this, where I was really miserable. I hated the world. I mean, I was struggling with extreme depression and drug addiction, but I hated the world and I just hated everything in the world. I was just similar to like this character Holden Caulfield and like Catcher in the Rye. That's like my mindset. I was just like, people are fake. I hate this world, very nihilistic. And I could see that it was just because I was not doing anything with my life. I was deeply traumatized. I couldn't function. And there's a part of me that just hated people who represented what I knew deep down inside that I didn't have. And now I see this is very prevalent online, especially. Another thing that came to mind is like this kind of right-wing red pill men community where they're constantly talking shit about women and women with high body counts and like women don't value men anymore. They're only after, there's this like large projection towards women in general coming from a lot of these kind of online trolls in the right-wing red pill community. And they actually feel they're entitled to a beautiful relationship with a beautiful woman without having to have any relational skills, any success, anything going for them. And I think that's also kind of this covert narcissism as well. I see that in that circle.
Or they see success only like, it's all about money, wealth, success, Andrew Tate. A valuable man is success and rich and even though he has zero relational skills.
Yeah, but then they hate on women who want men who are successful because they themselves are not successful. So it's like this vicious cycle.
But I also want to point, you make a good point. Thank you for, sharing from your own vulnerability. We have to also be, when we deepen this work, put the mirror on ourselves. Because I can see myself in some of that as well, based on narcissistic wounding. Again, there are vast different levels of narcissism, so we all exhibit some of them because none of us are completely healthy, connected to essence and self. We all have our own personality mask, wounds and traumas we act out, and we can easily fall on the spectrum of overt or covert narcissism, not to the extremes, right? But we live in a world where pathology has become normalized, and when everyone, I have not met one person who is not narcissistically wounded. What that means, narcissistically wounded, that some of your necessary childhood needs were not met in childhood. Why? Because no parents are perfect, and then we try to seek it from others. We feel either overly self-important, entitled, or we self-diminish and fall into more self-pity, and everybody's against us. Doom and gloom, victim blame trap, and all of that. So there's vast different levels on that, but we all can easily exhibit some of these characteristics.
Yeah, I would say also, since we live in I forget who wrote it. He wrote about this epidemic of narcissism. I forget what it was back in the 90s. I read it a while ago. But we have an epidemic of narcissistic parenting styles, of narcissistic people. So a lot of us have been raised by parents who didn't love us for who we truly were, but loved us for some image that they projected into us. And that image had to do with their own wounding. So that's how we have this kind of intergenerational, trauma of narcissism getting passed down, because then what happens is that you learn that I'm only valuable if I perform, if I'm successful, if I'm rich, if I'm attractive, because that's how my parents validated me. And then we fall in love with our false self instead of our true self. So the work we need to do, if you have any parent who you even think is slightly on the narcissistic personality spectrum, I'm not talking about a full-blown disorder, but had traits, you need to work on recovering that true self and really connecting to the pain, to the grief, to the emptiness, and feeling into that in order to recover your true self within you, because that part of your own inner light was never acknowledged, was never nurtured. So there's almost a reparenting that needs to go on for many people. And I think that's much more valuable than these guides online where they're telling you, oh, how to protect yourself from narcissists. And some of those techniques do work, especially the gray rock method where you become as disinteresting as possible. But I have to say, the real inner work is really recovering the part of ourself that wasn't seen, that wasn't validated by the narcissistic parent. Because if you've gotten into a narcissistic relationship with someone who has that personality type, chances are one of your parents was. That's why you fell in love with that person. That's why it felt like love. So the deepest work that you can do if you've gone down this pathway is to really nurture that part of yourself that was never seen growing up, and to heal that wound so that you no longer would even tolerate a relationship like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's always a match, in the sense when you attract narcissistic personality types into your life. Also, I would argue that most of the dark triad types who become more toxic, more psychopathic, more Machiavellian, I would even argue start out as covert narcissists in a sense, not happy with themselves and envious of others, but still not enough confidence to even present themselves, and then use anonymous or attack others, troll others in order to project their pain, what they feel about themselves onto others.
Well, it's also a vicious cycle, because something I think about a lot, even in my own life, is like how many people are really just wasting their life away by just being engaged online all the time, constantly getting dragged into pointless arguments instead of nurturing their life's purpose, their relationships. And like, imagine what a black hole that turns into if that's what you've done for 10 years of your life and you have nothing around you that's meaningful to show for it. And then I see a lot of these people, living miserable lives for quite a long time. It's only getting worse by the amount of time they spend online. And then it becomes this whole sea of people who are almost being sucked in by the energy vampire entity of social media in general. And they're becoming more dark triad personality types with time, because it's being they're being rewarded in that context specifically too.
Being rewarded in terms of the dopamine hits.
Yeah, they get followers, they get attention from powerful people, beautiful women. Like they get attention, they get everything they're not getting in their real life online, albeit through pathological means. Yes. And then it's getting worse with time. So let's move on to how we deal with these types. So we're just going to offer our own practical advice from our own direct experience, literally dealing with thousands of these types. So take it or leave it. Some will be valuable for you, some will not. The number one thing I really want to point out is like, you have to understand your blind spots. You have to engage in your own inner work, shadow work, because you have to remember that people can really only hurt you if what they said tags into a mistaken belief about yourself. So if someone calls you a name and a part of you believes that it's true, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, but it will hurt more to the extent that you do believe that. So if you think you're stupid and someone calls you stupid, that will hurt much more. I also want to point out that, it's normal to feel a little ouch or a little or a little yikes when you deal with these people, because you're dealing with some very pathological people who you normally wouldn't encounter online unless you work in a psychiatric institution, basically. So when someone says something awful to you, it's actually healthy and okay to be like, oh, ew, that didn't feel good, right? But then if it really hurts you and sends you into a spiral for days afterwards, then it's your work to inquire. You could ask yourself questions like, what was it exactly this person said that hurt me so much? Does what they said remind me of anything I've heard before from someone in the past? Another thing you could inquire is like, is this something I secretly believe about myself? Where did I get that belief from? Is that belief even true? Are there other aspects of this one thing that they said about me that I'm missing? Like, because when people tend to say something insulting to us and there's a part of us that believes it's true, we will zero in on that and we'll just think that that's all we are. We're only this, instead of looking at the bigger picture. Another thing I just want to add on to that too is that people will read into what you're saying all sorts of intentions, all sorts of ideas, all sorts of words that you didn't say. And you have to be able to know what you meant, what your intent was, and what you said, because 99% of the time, they're literally just going to pull a straw man argument, meaning they're going to make up something that you said to basically get you angry so that you can they can get a response out of you.
That's, I want to address that as well, because what you said, I definitely speak from experience from over 2 decades, speaking online and especially on social media. The 99% of dark triad troll type attacks, they're attacking something I never said or implied, or completely misconstruing and making something out. It's like a bait. It's a straw man argument, right? And that's how they try to rail you in. And the key point is, let's talk about compassion, because a lot of people fall into the trap not because they don't have compassion, but they have blind compassion. Mm-hmm. So compassion is necessary. So it means, careful of your own reaction. You don't counterattack in this loose with personal attacks and go off on the other person. Whatever's working through the other person or their own trauma is just wanting that, as they want you to engage, right? They get off on that. You have to understand it's not about winning an argument. If you go, that was my blind spot. They put all these strawman arguments and baited me into, and even personal attacks. And I tried to make them clear, wrote this long post, but it was a waste of time, because this is not what about. They don't want to understand. They were out for the loosh, for the friction, for the fight, for the drama, right?
The loosh meaning the life force.
The life force, exactly.
From you, yeah.
That they won't get you from your reaction. So have compassion, but not blind compassion. What kind of compassion? You have to understand these dark triad types are their own worst enemy. They literally live in a hell of their own making, and they want to make sure you feel the misery they do, right? So you have compassion, but not blind compassion, which means making boundaries, not engaging, right? That is the key point. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. And also, I want to, it reminds me on social media, you don't owe anyone your attention. You don't anyone, if somebody asks you questions, you don't have the responsibility. You don't anyone a debate or an answer and all of that. I also had learned this the hard way. It's not like all strangers. And then people say, well, you're censoring me and this and that. No, I'm just choose not to engage with everyone. I don't take everybody's feedback. I have a life. I have my time. You don't owe anybody's time or attention or engaging in debate. It's nothing to do with censoring. They can make their own case on their page and talk about whatever they want, but you don't owe anybody any time or attention.
I think with me, I always ask myself when I see a comment, is this person making an argument in good faith? Meaning, do they want to have a conversation here? And honestly, if you're aware enough to kind of spot the signs, most people don't. They're not, and you can tell by the way they phrase it. Usually someone who has a genuine question phrases in a way that's respectful, that's not just insulting you right off the gate, So that's what I've noticed. So it's important to have compassion, meaning like dark triad types and people who live in this, they're their own worst enemy. I hate to say it, but often their relationship sucks, their life sucks. They live in a hell of their own making, and they want to make you feel the misery that they do. Yeah. So they're just passing on their misery to whoever will take it, and it makes them feel good. I've even heard, it actually reminds me, because a lot of really traumatized psychopaths, basically, they want to make other people suffer in the same way they suffered in childhood. Like there's a glee they get out of it. So you have to really understand that they're trying to make you feel as bad as they feel all of the time, but they're probably not aware of, and they're just trying to drag you into it.
And if on that note, if you suffer, as many people do, from a people pleaser program or I'm not good enough program, you will have a hard time with making boundaries. You will take things very personally. You feel easily overwhelmed. Sometimes, and I've learned that as well on social media, the most favorite button is block and delete. And that's it. That's totally fine, right? You need to take off yourself. You need to be clear what works for you and what doesn't work for you, what you're available for and what not. Your own self-value or your own self-worth. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. And a few more points I'd like to say too is another point is prepare yourself mentally before you speak up and say something that will upset people. Like get into warrior mode, like get your emotions out of it, get your armor of God on, Don't let your fear of what people may say to it prevent you from saying what you need to say. You have a voice for a reason. You're entitled to use it. You're entitled to speak up for what you think. If you don't speak up for what you think, you're never going to understand your own thinking to begin with. So, you have to really understand that they really want you to self-censor yourself. That's how Wetiko works, by just creating this hostile environment, So it's really important to prepare yourself mentally before you speak up. Have boundaries around your social media use, have boundaries around the way that you use it. Meaning, like, I decide when I put down my phone, I've consciously made the choice. I don't care about what's going on there. It's not part of my life. I don't bring it into my life. And if I do tend to do that, then what I need to do is do some work on myself, because that person just showed me a part of my own shadow or my own shit that I'm not seeing. But generally speaking, this boundaries means your own boundaries. Like, can you just turn off the screen and walk away? Can you just take care of yourself? And remember that this is not real life. This is just a random stranger on the screen who's trying to bring you down, and to not give them that power over you that they want.
And I also wanted that, just to close off, that reminds me of another aspect we need to be very mindful of, I believe, and also be honest with ourselves. How we maybe not being subjected, to dark triad types through our own posts, but how we might actually indulge in reading other people's drama, and go off in the comments. I sense this a lot. The how do you call it? The unspoken, the silent watcher, so to speak. A lot of people go off on other people's drama just by reading it. So, be honest with yourself. What part of you feeds off of just reading drama and people attacking each other and all of that? Be it on the political spectrum, in the truther movement, whatever it may be, there's something that feeds off of drama and maybe feeding through you.
Well, I think there's also almost like more covert dark triads who like get off on watching people troll others and insult others, but maybe don't engage with it that much themselves, but they'll like the comments and stuff,
Exactly.
But it's like a covert version. Like, they have the same drives, but they don't have the bravery to actually leave a comment, but they'll like every pathological, sadistic comment that's on there.
They almost vicariously live their own pathology through the trolls.
Yes, exactly.
By liking their comments or something.
Exactly. And then the really important point too is you have to keep in mind that anyone who goes around attacking others on social media, and the reason I'm pointing out social media, because this is where personality types like this thrive. They don't actually thrive in real life, because they would get punched in the face. Someone would spit on them. Someone would be like, true. F you. They might get arrested. There's actual repercussions, but online, not so much. So they're doing it though online because it feels good. They want to get you upset. They want to know that they can affect you. That feeds into their, desire for omnipotence, to control others. So your main goal should be to not give them the dopamine hit. And the best way to do this is to ignore them completely. I know that's hard, but that's the only way to do it, is just to ignore them completely. I've even seen people who are more pathological with that personality type, I'll ignore them. And this is like a next level thing, but they'll like go on my other social media profiles, and that's and kind of stalk me with what they want me to respond to. So ignoring them completely, having good boundaries, So the way that I see it is that when you're opening yourself up online, you're literally opening yourself to the entire world. So you have to have a sense of what you will allow and what you won't allow. You have to be able to know that you have your own back, that you're going to protect yourself, because it's really honestly abnormal to let everyone in the world have access to you all the time.
Yes.
And that's kind of what the internet is like saying that it's offering, And I would argue that's extremely both psychologically and spiritually unhealthy for you to just let whoever have access to you at any time and let them ruin your day just by a single comment. So you're allowed to determine your boundaries, what you're available for, what you're not for. If you want to engage and share your work online, you have some say on your terms of engagement. So I think that's really important, because I hear a lot of people in like kind of the truth community be like, oh yeah, we should we need to have open discussions, and it's really important we get into discussions about things. And yes, I agree. Discussions are amazing. You can learn up so much, especially when it's two people who are speaking in good faith. They could really expand their perspective. They can clarify what they think a bit more. They can maybe change their mind. But let's be honest, most conversations that happen, especially with dark triad types, are not in an effort to understand the other's perspective, to open themselves up to different ways of thinking. It has nothing to do with that. So I'm available for discussions in person with people I love and respect and care about, who want to talk about different things. But if it's someone who wants to come right out of the gate and insult me and strawman argument me, then that's a waste of my time. So we need to be discerning with what we're available for and we're not for, because even if your work is important, as your work grows, you're just going to meet more and more of these people. You're just going to get flooded with more and more, and you're going to have to become stronger and stronger through engaging your own inner work, through having your own boundaries, so having your own awareness on how this operates. Because the main thing that Wetiko operates through is trying to silence us through these pathological people, which is something we're going to get way more into the next hour.
Yeah, speaking of the next hour, this is the end of the first hour. And as Laura mentioned at the beginning, if you're not a member yet, you have access to over 100 hours on the membership for the second hour of the podcast, which we go way deeper. Even certain things we usually get censored for in the first hour. So you can sign up there on my website at veilofreality.com on the membership, or veilofreality.com/membership. And in the second hour, yes, we expand on the dark triad type, going beyond the psychological perspective and tie this into occult forces, entities, also self-created thought forms, how these entities feed through a person, the H. Smith syndrome, how low vibrational frequency or sadism and inflicting pain is food for other forces. That ties into the hyperdimensional matrix in all that tags into people's pathologies and shadow, how dark triad types are literally hosts for dark entities, even earthbound spirits, the diseased spirits of the spirits of diseased people that hang out in the lower astral realm can attach to other people and live vicariously through them. I go deeper into Thomas Meyer's work again, who, if you could remember, wrote this amazing book, The Spiritual Consequences of the COVID Vaccine, on soul, spirit, and life after death. And he has done other work, really going deep, working with elemental forces. He's very perceptible, highly clairvoyant, and really understands the spiritual world and has a very spiritual scientific approach to it. And I'm really fascinated by this work in one of his book about elemental forces and how our thought forms also create entities and forces that can come back around haunting us, so to speak. So I get all of this in the second hour, and thanks for listening, and we'll be right back.